Stay Tuned brings together local experts, journalists, civic leaders, and regular people to have tough conversations for a stronger St. Louis. Add your voice to our conversation, and you're at the table as we stay on top of current events and go deeper, bringing more light and less heat to the issues that matter. From the 9 network of public media in Grand Center, this is Stay Tuned. 2015 was an eventful year in St. Louis, from startups to social justice. We took on a lot of topics on Stay Tuned this past year. Tonight, we'll revisit some of the most invigorating moments of these conversations. The year started in St. Louis for many with tension and a sense of even more division than usual. The events of Ferguson were mostly in 2014, but in 2015, we got an in-depth look in the mirror and plans for how we might move forward. The Department of Justice and the Ferguson Commission issued reports, and that started some honest conversations here at Stay Tuned.
Well, everything is related. Municipalities are joined at the hip to school districts. If the school district is failing, the municipality will fail. If the economy fails, the municipality will fail. So everything's related. That's why on the Ferguson Commission, we have to look at police, we have to look at courts, but beyond that, we really have to look at economics, we have to look at growth, we have to look at expansion, and we have to look at education. So everything is interconnected. I think you're correct. And so that's a great challenge for us as a region. And we have such a history, and how do we begin to chart a different direction? That's the challenge for us.
I think at some point we are going to have to talk about, as a region, why we are separated like this, and the ways that we are separated, and then move to a place where we are really trying to be neighbors with one another. I think at some point we're going to have to talk about racial covenants and why our suburbs were created, and it really wasn't so that we could be closer together as individuals and we could live in integrated communities, because we don't. And so at some point we're going to have that conversation, and then how it impacts our educational system, not to mention our police, right? So we're having this conversation about police, but that same policing practice happens in our schools as well, and it's disparate treatment again. So if we looked at suspension and expulsion rates, they look a lot like our police on the ground. And so, we're going to have to start having real conversations really about race, and then how we could be a region that is healthy, that is clear, that is committed to being a better region, which is incredibly possible, but we have to have honest dialogue about where we're going next.
Is this fast enough for the young people who are in the streets?
I mean, I don't think it's not fast enough, because these are issues that have been going on for years and years and years. These are issues that a community continues to face on a day-to-day basis. So after a while, it's this, you need this change quickly, and that's something that I can say. Once September come, I think the commission has really focused on that. 3 things that we are looking at when it comes to our recommendations: is it transformative, is it unflinching, and is it urgent? And I think the community is going to look at some of these recommendations and say, this is definitely transformative, this is something urgent that we need to act on, and this is a recommendation that's not scared, it's unflinching, it's something that the community is asking for, not elected officials that's trying to water it down. But all the recommendations that have been put forward are from the community members. It's not fast enough, but I think these recommendations that we have, the commission that's going to put forward, are going to change things quicker than you even see policy from lawmakers. I mean, these are some bold recommendations that we're putting forward that should have honestly happened a long time ago.
Yeah. Like, what is bold that comes to mind first for you?
I mean, I think one of the most important things that comes to mind is the need for independent and external prosecutions and investigations of officer-involved deaths, so in-custody deaths, officer-involved shootings. When we talk about building trust and legitimacy in the community, that is the first and most important factor in community and law enforcement relations, right? So if the police recognize that they derive their power from the community, and the community feels that they can actually trust law enforcement and the systems that surround law enforcement, then we can actually see things progress. And part of that is needs to be the perception of impartiality, right? That we can actually say, if this is going to move forward, if a tragedy does occur, which we hope it doesn't, but if it does occur, then I can actually trust and believe that the systems and the people propping up those systems have my best interests at heart and are not out there doing things in their own interest, right? And that's something that we know the community has struggled with. We struggled with it in the wake of Michael Brown's death. We've continued to struggle with it. We've seen communities all across the country struggle with it. So that is something that was in the president's report. It's in the Ferguson Commission report. And I think that that is one of those bold and unflinching pieces.
it's been 7 months since the shooting death of Michael Brown, and since race and law enforcement has been the trending topic across all media platforms. And every time we sit down, I always ask, where are you? How do you feel? Where are you emotionally at this point? It was first after the shooting, then after the verdict, now after the DOJ report around the Ferguson Police Department. Where are you all now?
It's like, yeah, the Mike Brown stuff is over with, but I think it's been being compounded with other situations. The fraternity stuff is going on now, so it's just seemed like it's been more racist than ever in our life from 2014 to now. It's just like an extreme amount.
It's extreme amount in the media. I don't think anything's different than how it's been. I had people who are like kind of outside of the understanding of like our relationship with the police, and when the DOJ report came out, a lot of my friends, they were like, oh my goodness, like could you believe the things that were said in the DOJ report? I'm like, I live it every day.
And so you can change laws, you can try to, like you said, bring in different programs to reform the police department or do whatever you want, but when you're dealing with the same ideal and the same mindset, that's what needs to be changed. The hearts of people, the understanding of people.
Well, Maya, how has it changed you?
Well, I was going to say the most frustrating thing for me has been probably also one of the more therapeutic things and very necessary things is making sure the conversation keeps happening, both within folks who have lived it, who experienced it, that this DOJ report is nothing new to them, as well as to folks who are like just blown away by it.
You mentioned that it seems like there's more racism than there ever was, just because it's now, people are talking about it more, expressing themselves more. Words do hurt. Do you see moving forward as a possibility that there will eventually be change?
I think that there will be some type of change, and I think that there still is. And the reason why I say that is because people aren't backing down as far as the protest goes, for one.
Are you surprised by that?
I mean, to be honest, I am. I thought that it would be, because the Trayvon Martin thing happened, and then people stopped protesting.
But I just felt a little disheartened to see the world stand up and be like, this is the most outrageous, bad thing we've ever seen, and then nothing happened still. Like, that, for me, that just was like, whatever. Like, I'm done.
I kind of agree with what you're saying, but then again, this particular fight has only been going on for 7 months. Like, we've been struggling for a long time, but like, this fire right here has only been going on for 7 months, and yeah, it's been a bunch of slaps in the face, but it's like, it's just like anything you want, like whether you chasing a dream, whether you fighting for, equality, you don't have to get back up when you get knocked down, and like, people have been showing a great deal of resilience.
What do you need to see, or what would be something that would convince you that's a good sign? What would be a good sign to you?
I'd say the investigation of just all police departments, especially those that police poverty or impoverished Black neighborhoods, or just impoverished neighborhoods in general.
Investing into the school system and just making like education equal all across the board.
Man, because it's the youth. And our children, they go to these schools and like a child's potential is limited to its environment's reach. You can have the kid who can save the entire world right here in St. Louis, but he doesn't have the education to even get a chance to do that. You know what I mean? Like we can give birth to people who can change the world, but when we steady our declining people of those opportunities, we're also declining ourselves opportunities.
I would just like to see our generation just really step in to start mentoring some of these younger people, start really getting involved into some of these younger people's lives who are in poverty and don't necessarily have a way out.
It could be very unrealistic, but out of respect for Mike Brown and the lives lost, that like the killing is not at the level it usually is during this summer. That's something I would like these 3 months or the summer, I would like to see Black people be like, you know what, we're not killing each other. We gonna chill out and do right. That's what I would like to see.
Unfortunately, for too many, that wasn't the case. The summer in parts of St. Louis was violent, and homicide numbers continue to climb, with the number of murders this year passing last year's total by early fall. and we could end up with one of the highest homicide rates in recent memory. We explored policing strategies and heard from an Illinois State Police lieutenant who shared the positive changes he's seen on his side of the river.
The whack-a-mole model, police come in, deal with crime problems, and then get lost, that is not an effective crime control strategy.
That we agree on.
Yeah, we agree on that. Should the police permanently occupy particular areas? No. What I think and what I think the research suggests is that the police do go in initially, deal with problems initially, assuming some success, then they move elsewhere, crime does move, and they return periodically to those areas. And they don't have to occupy the area permanently, but they have to be back in sufficient numbers so that people in the community, both criminals and other residents, think, police could be around the corner any minute.
And where we differ is that I think that we need to look at those neighborhoods that over the last decade have accounted for the majority of the violence.
Agreed.
Those are the areas we need to target with police resources. So we need more community policing in those areas over a long-term period, at least 12 to 18 months, not 2 weeks. And we also need other agencies and city governments to prioritize those areas. So SLATE, targeting job placement, forestry, going in and make sure all those areas are clean. SLDC to come up with development plans and economic incentives for businesses to open up in those communities and for jobs to be created. But we just need to prioritize those areas in the same way as state officials and local officials prioritize the Rams' needs or Paul McKee's needs. But citizens in those neighborhoods have needs too, and those need to be prioritized.
It sounds like this is a little of what you all are talking about on the law enforcement side of the table. Is this a new way of being a cop,
Well, in my opinion, police are from the community for the community. It's time for police officers to accept their responsibility that they're for the community. And that's gonna take time, being in school, reading, spending time with the children. I know sound like officer friendly here, but bottom line up front, I wouldn't be wearing this uniform right now if a police officer didn't take time for me. And that's what it's got to get back to that. Police have to get back into the communities.
So are there enough of you to do that work?
Absolutely not. But with everyone at the table and our elected officials, we're beginning to see that it's going to take more than just the hotspot policing and just a different type of initiatives that show up. It has to be a permanent solution, a permanent part of the policing strategies now.
Well, with 2 games left in the 2015 NFL season, the St. Louis Rams situation here in town is still far from decided. This past year, plans were unveiled for a $1 billion outdoor stadium on the North Riverfront in an attempt to keep the team, but debate continues. Should the city put down money for a brand new stadium when football may not be the most pressing issue in our city? We explored this topic twice in 2015, most recently as the season was just kicking off. Will it be the last season for the Rams in St. Louis?
Are we just not getting the hint here from Stan Kroenke and the Rams? Is there any way that they're actually staying in St. Louis? Do we need to kind of deal with the reality that this team is gone?
Well, I think that we don't know the reality. I don't think the commissioner of football knows the reality. I don't think the owners know what's going to happen. And there are a lot of different possibilities. I would grant you that the least likely possibility seems to be the St. Louis Rams staying in St. Louis with Stan Kroenke as the owner. But the St. Louis Rams staying in St. Louis with a different owner, a different team coming here, even an expansion franchise, are all possibilities. I mean, you talked to Dave Peacock in the task force. Obviously, they're talking to NFL owners, to the NFL front office. And there are a lot of different permutations that can happen if we show up with a viable plan to build the stadium. There's only one scenario where we know with certitude what will happen, and that is if we don't show up with a viable plan to build the stadium, and that is St. Louis will not have NFL football. That's the only certainty that we know.
Whether or not the Rams leave or stay, I think one certainty is that Stan Kroenke is going to build a stadium in Los Angeles. And I think that is what's driving the fact that he wants to move the franchise there. I don't think he is waiting for them to do anything for him. He's going to build a stadium. He wants to move his franchise there. I understand that. The concern I have is with the National Football League. And this entity that is the National Football League, to rely on them to back up whatever promises they're saying, or we keep hearing they're saying you're doing good work and all that. Until we have a promise from the National Football League written down that they are going to have a franchise in St. Louis, and I don't know what the years, are in 30. In 5 years you'll have a team. In 10 years you'll have a team. If the Rams leave within this parameter of time, you will have a franchise. Then I said, let's go. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's pay people to do work as we are now, and I think that's the people's money too. And I just don't trust the National Football League.
Cities that have the NFL because they're an economic engine. And part of what we saw in the intro was that we are an NFL city. By every economic measure, we're a middle-of-the-road economic city. There's no reason why Indianapolis, Cincinnati, Buffalo, Green Bay have teams and we wouldn't. So it's hard to imagine if an economic package is put together by St. Louis that the NFL would walk.
Does the treasurer's office worry about these millionaire players leaving town, or this large corporation you could see leaving town? Are you concerned about the Rams?
So personally, I'm not concerned about the Rams leaving town. St. Louis has 99 problems, and a stadium isn't one, in my personal opinion. We have a whole host of things that I think we need to fix before even being concerned about whether the Rams stay or go. For example, our school district is teetering on the edge of provisional accreditation, and so are all the other 22 school districts that surround the city. We have economic inequality that, there's double-digit unemployment in minority communities. I think that we need to use the old cliche, take care of home first before we start talking about a stadium that most of the people who live in the city can't even afford to go to the games.
Well, one topic that many consider to be more important than a new stadium is the education of our children. From failing school districts to discipline issues within schools, we took a hard look at the state of education for all our region's children.
How close or how far are we from education being the same for two different zip codes? Right here in the St. Louis region, you can be just a couple of digits off and have very different. Speaking of data, your outcomes are very different, or likely to be very different.
We're not even close, and we give ourselves way too much credit for trying, okay? And the reality that depending upon an accidental birth or where you happen to live, we have huge disparities in the delivery of basically a public infrastructure, because that's what education is part of the infrastructure of a society, and everybody's entitled to it. And I'd almost argue that I would love to see somebody file a 14th Amendment case in the Supreme Court about the inequities relative to how, I think they've done it before and lost, but the reality is if children are citizens of the United States, and they are, then they have an equal protection right under the 14th Amendment. And so the fact that we inequitably fund education based on the randomness of geography and ethnicity fundamentally undermines their rights as United States citizens, as far as I was concerned.
And I think some would argue hinders our overall economy. This isn't just some may look at this as a moral question or the right thing to do, but you can also be fairly pragmatic about this. I think it's we've talked on the show before. It's not good for the rest of the region if one area is suffering.
Yeah, I'd like to just speak to that. And our problem, the reason we don't do it is because we don't see education for children as a moral imperative. When you get into the economic benefit or the societal benefit, that's a policy question, and you got options on policy. You can do it one way or you can do it another. You don't have options when you're confronted with moral imperatives. You either do them or you don't do it. And once we make education, again, a moral imperative, then we're going to be required as adults in a society to live up to that responsibility. So I think you do, that the problem is with framing it in non-moral terms. And we have that moral responsibility to children, and we're failing to meet it for a lot of children, not all children, but for way too many children every day.
As long as you continue to draw boundaries around schools, we will never solve this problem. We're going to be spinning our wheels, because here's what happens. Some schools do great. They start improving. And then what happens? people start moving into there. They raise property values, and the poor people have to move someplace else because the property values have gone up, and they move into other districts. This is what happens. People move into better districts, and some other district then has a surplus of low achieving disadvantaged students who come from poor families, and then the people there move out because that district's not doing well, and they move into the other districts that start performing better. So as long as you continue to draw circles around schools and say you have to go here because you live here, we're going to have the same problem.
The discipline gap in Missouri, this is looking at the school year of 2011-2012, over 27% of African American high school students received suspensions, while only about 7% of white students were suspended. So just picking up on what Norm and I were talking about, what do you see that represents? What does that tell you about what's going on in your school and schools at large?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is a clear understanding of expectations. And do we have the same expectations for all of our students? That is starting on the district level where I sit, and then translated on down to all the various stakeholders that we are responsible for the students. If we do not clearly articulate what we expect of our classroom communities, and if there are inequities, that needs to be articulated and explained. And from my perspective, if we notice that this is happening, it needs to be addressed. Because I know on my level, I go through all the reports every quarter and I disaggregate according to different groups, race, gender, if they have special education courses, if they're free and reduced lunch rate students. It can be monitored in a way where we can see what's going on and if there's patterns. So yes, it's telling me that there isn't a clear expectation for all students, that we're doing our best to keep our students in school.
Okay, see how that plays out in the classroom is that when kids know that they're behind, and teachers set this in what in some cases can be an unreasonable expectation for certain kids that they know are behind, it kind of creates this attitude in a kid where the kid does not necessarily present themselves well from that point on. They don't know how to deal with failure, and they need people to coach them on how to bounce back from situations when they happen. If you don't have someone that can really work closely with kids in those moments where they're behind or they're lacking some kind of information that they need to be successful, if you don't have an individual that can relate to them and can really work with them at that critical key moment in their life, that downward trend is going to take place, and from that point on, it's going to be difficult moving forward.
What should we be doing when the problem can look, I'm guessing, very different between different school districts?
It can, and it concerns me when we make blanket statements about what should be done for children. You know what, every situation for families are different, and we haven't even talked about bringing parents into the conversation and partnering with parents and creating real, authentic, caring relationships with our parents. It's not just the schools. We have to have parents in there and have them accountable, and if they need support, how can we support them? And in some cases, it's educating them.
Our goal on Stay Tuned is to bring more light and less heat to difficult conversations. But sometimes our guests just plain disagree with each other. One of the more passionate discussions this past year was between the attorney for the Metropolitan Taxi Cab Commission, Neil Bruntrager, and local entrepreneur Ed Domain about whether the city should have the ride-sharing service Uber. We should note Ed Domain now has his own show on the 9 Network called The Domain Tech Report, but he is not involved editorially with Stay Tuned.
People have not been happy with cabs for some time. I don't think that's entirely a secret.
Well, let me address this real quickly, because this isn't about the free market. This is about public safety. And again, what we have to do at the MTC is make sure that we oversee the operation of taxi cabs. And overseeing them means that we make sure that the background checks are done on the drivers. We make sure that we have as much information as we can possibly have. We make sure that we oversee the insurance, and I know that that's a dispute among others, but we do everything that can be done. The idea of bringing Uber in, and I know that's been a big argument by Mr. Domain, is this insurance issue as it applied to him personally, but the idea of Uber is they will give us none of this information. So again, if he thinks that he's been victimized because there was a cab that had an issue, and I'm familiar with that issue and can discuss that issue at depth, but again, if you think that you're going to solve that problem by bringing in Uber, who will not identify their drivers, who will not provide background check information other than to say we do it, and will not give us any of their insurance information on their individual drivers, you're out of your mind if you say that.
Casey, that makes no sense, because if the fingerprint issue is such a big issue, Chief Dotson has said it's not a concern for him. And if they're willing to waive it right now temporarily, what sense does that make? How can we be safe if they're going to waive it temporarily? And as far as the other issue goes, with safety, every driver, every car in Uber is being tracked by GPS. You know where it is. If someone's in trouble, they're going to rate the driver bad. The driver can rate the passenger badly. With a cab, you have no guarantee.
Uber eventually went against the ruling of the Metropolitan Taxi Cab Commission and started service in the city of St. Louis anyway, but that certainly isn't the end of the story. Multiple lawsuits concerning Uber are now pending. Well, as 2015 turns into 2016, we will keep following these stories and many more. So until next year, stay tuned.